Hey everybody, Will Brink here, brinkzone.com. To cover a very popular topic today on test boosters or testosterone boosters, which is a never-ending topic of interest. Probably the most popular segment of the supplement market is certainly among people in the gym, young men especially, but it's a never-ending interest topic and segment, which I'm going to do as I've done in the past. I'm going to use a past article that I wrote, which was probably one of my most popular articles to cover this topic. And we'll go through that a bit, and then I'll add some additional information and talk about one that's making, I would say, making the rounds again. Some people may think it's new because what is typical to do with a lot of supplements, just as it is with fashion and some other things, is to give about 10 years to go by and wait for people to forget and bring it back and present it as something new and exciting, because the generation before takes about 10 years, right, before the one group of young people who were really excited about something mature and either move on or recognize that it doesn't do anything, it was a waste of the money, and they bring it back out again. Sometimes they change the name, sometimes they don't. So I'll mention this quote unquote new product at the end a bit when we go through that. But so this article here, I'm going to bring this guy into my stream. So this article here on testosterone boosting supplements, definitely one of the most popular articles I've ever written. It's still perfectly, it's actually an older article, as you can see. I should have updated it, but it is more than up to date as far as my position. I haven't seen anything new and exciting and different that would alter my position on testosterone boosters as a category. The problem with testosterone boosters is it's such a big category that there's so many potential things that sort of funnel their way into testosterone boosting or testosterone supporting. For example, something as simple as magnesium, which if you're deficient in magnesium, which is very common, by the way, that can suppress testosterone, zinc, to various herbal stuff, to various amino acid combinations, to, of course, there were the pro-hormones and on and on. So it's a really big category that you can't really narrow down without, you have to go basically down the rabbit hole to cover each and every one of them. So what I did in the article, which we'll go through and discuss a bit, is I sort of looked at it from a category point of view and summarize the category in general. So let's take a look at this article, and I will keep an eye on the comment section. I do have a lot of stuff open here, and so I'm still getting used to this tech, as I've mentioned before, and hopefully I will see the comments and questions. So, basically the beginning of the article more or less summarizes what we're talking about, but the category itself, I will summarize that itself is under three main issues. One, most of them have no data behind them at all. I mean, it's just complete nonsense data. It doesn't exist. There's no studies. It's just pulled from, somebody's where. That's part one. More common, at least these days, I think, back in the day, you could just completely make stuff up. People don't do that quite as badly as they used to, or companies plays badly, but secondary to no data at all is the data they do have is of very poor quality, or taken out of context, or just not applicable at all. I mean, for example, let's say they do a study in 70-year-old obese men with very low testosterone, and they find an effect. Is that applicable to the majority of buyers that they're trying to sell it to? Young, healthy men? No. So that's another thing you have to pay attention to. And three, the doses used in the formula are far below what the study used to get the effect that they saw at all. That's also very common. Some study will use I'm just going to say 2,000 milligrams to see an effect, and the product will have 200 milligrams in it, and so forth, or even less. I mean, to be honest, perfectly honest with you, I think I'm actually being generous by giving them that margin. So that summarizes the problems of the category in general. Okay. And I see that, I haven't seen any difference. Nothing has changed in that particular segment of the market. And, I keep an eye on it, but to be honest with you, I just really don't get excited by latest, greatest T-booster. And I'm going to explain, why that is in a moment. All right. So let's get down to the next really important issue here, what I call physiological threshold. So what is the physiological threshold? Basically, how much testosterone boost or how much increase in testosterone does one need to see before they actually experience anything? I mean, this is why you're taking it, right? And now I have to say that the longer I'm in the business and the more I've been in research, the more interested I tend to be in what I call, rubber meets the road type studies. That is not, did you show me a lab report that, they had a little temporary bump or a transient increase in some hormone or something, but did they get stronger? Did they get bigger? Did they change their body comp, and so forth? If the study does not look at those, what we call endpoints, I honestly just don't care. And that's me. I'm not going to, some people might get more excited about, a rat study that found, a statistically significant change in testosterone. But my question and my issue and interest at this point is that change, if you see any at all, which is, not necessarily the case, but if you see any at all, is it physiologically relevant enough to do anything? And I think one of my favorite examples, which you will find in this article, and I will post it, is anybody that knows anything about, let's say, testosterone or to anabolic steroids or, TRT or something, knows that this is basically a thought experiment that I use. If you were to take, say, a small amount of testosterone, say 25 milligrams per week of testosterone propionate. Now, testosterone propionate, if those don't know, is a very fast-acting testosterone. There's different esters of testosterone, enanthate, cypionate. Those are there's unducanate, but enanthate and enanthate and cypionate are really the most commonly used esters in the U.S. They're more long-acting. They're what you're generally going to see in testosterone replacement and so forth. Propionate, because of its extremely short half-life, is not very common, or not common at all in TRT. It may be a bit more common in bodybuilding circles and that type of thing. So, but here's the thought experiment: if you were to take, say, 25 milligrams a week of propionate, would you, on a lab test, would you see a big spike but would you see a moderate spike in testosterone? Well, you would, right? Now, anybody that knows anything about this would say, but no one's going to gain anything off 25 milligrams a week of propionate. I mean, so it's a waste of time. The answer is they're right. So that's kind of like a thought experiment that I try to use with people to understand even these sorts of over-the-counter tests. But remember, we're not talking about, that's just a thought experiment. We're not talking about actual testosterone. We're talking about testosterone boosters, and we're talking about over-the-counter testosterone, meaning legal. But the thought experiment being, let's say you may see in a lab or in a study a transient, short-lived spike or something, or or not even short-lived, but just say a moderate increase in testosterone. But will it have any, like I say, any impact on things that most people care about, right? Gaining muscle mass, getting stronger, changing body comp. And we can go to the next thing, such as like libido and that. But the answer is probably not. And so even giving most testosterone boosters, say the benefit of the doubt, they actually do anything, which is a huge benefit of the doubt because most of them don't do jack shit. Are you going to see any real changes in anything? And the answer is usually no. And most of the time, when studies are done where they really look at those endpoints versus, again, just say some transient lab test or an animal test, they don't usually find anything. So there's some really interesting things that also in testosterone boosting that I do cover a little bit. For example, the sound of exotic cars raises testosterone. Interestingly, different cars they found, depending on the car, the type of car, actually had different effects. There was one study years ago. One of my favorites was, not only did the winning team in a football match, game, whatever, I don't watch football, actually have higher testosterone levels, the crowd of the winning team had higher testosterone levels, meaning that, again, even the excitement, the aggression, there's cultural, there's actual socio-cultural effects on testosterone men have. And that's a whole other topic we could get into, as to why that, men's testosterone levels have been getting lower and lower over the decades. That's another topic, but it looks pretty consistent that if you thought your grandfather was more, manly and had more testosterone, well, he probably was. And there's a number of possible reasons for that. Again, another show for another day. I think we'll have to get into that, and I'll discuss that. But men's testosterone levels on average have been going down over the decades. And, nobody is completely sure why, but it is most likely what we call multifactorial. I really don't think it's any one thing. It's going to be a number of things, such as, body fat's number one. We'll get to that in a minute. But number one, people love to look for all these exotic things as to why men's testosterone is going down, xenoestrogens and plastics and so on and so forth, bad politics and all that stuff. But you know what? The number one probable reason that men are seeing a reduction in testosterone levels is body fat. Our body fat's going up. That causes a increase in estrogen or estradiol, which affects the feedback loop, the HPTA feedback loop, and almost universally, especially if you're a younger, healthier guy, other than you just have body fat, excess body fat, lowering body fat invariably has a benefit. So I'm looking over at the comments. Hey, Steve, thank you, Steve. Thanks for saying thanks. I guess, if that makes sense. So hopefully you guys understand. Any questions about physiological threshold? I'm assuming that was pretty straightforward, is what I'm trying to say. But I think my point is there's a lot of different things. Some of them are actually pretty interesting that affect male testosterone levels. And of course, the question is, how much and how long? Is it enough? What we would call the magnitude of the effect, and is it long enough and high enough to have an actual impact? For example, looking at pictures of naked women also increases testosterone. Is anybody, are you going to get bigger and stronger from that? No. So take that for what it's worth. If you have a question, comment, on physiological threshold, that could be, I don't know, for some maybe a little bit kind of a wonky concept, but take a look at it. So, all right, let's go on to the next issue I have with the testosterone boosters. This one, I think some people have a hard time grasping this one, but I think it's really important, which I basically say, would you, do you add air to the tires in your car or your bicycle or something without checking the pressure? And of course the answer is no, right? But, guys have no problem at all, taking some testosterone booster without actually knowing what their testosterone levels are. And this makes no sense to me at all. Now, yes, I know it's a pain in the ass to go to a lab and get your testosterone checked. In some states, you'll have to look online. You don't need a doctor's prescription, FYI. You don't, like in Florida and other places, non-nanny commie states, sorry. You can just go to a lab and get your testosterone checked. In some states, you do need a doctor's prescription. But however, you can bypass that. There's a number of labs, for example, Life Extension can do hormonal profile for you without a doctor's prescription in your state. It can be written, in Florida, and they will send you a kit and you bring it to the lab and so forth. Now, I think honestly, it's worth it for any guy. I mean, at least over 40, you should be getting your hormones and your testosterone checked yearly. In my view, when you're younger, it's really up to you. I personally think it's good to know. And if you're going to be taking testosterone boosters and anything you think, increases testosterone, I really think there's something you'd want to know. I mean, without knowing this, I just think it's, it's just kind of throwing money away. It's your money, but I personally think, if I'm gonna do this experiment, I'd kind of want to know. And I can, if you're, I think that one thing we have to talk about, which people don't like to talk about because it makes them butthurt. But we have to talk about it no matter we like it or not, and that is placebo. That is what, expectation bias. And there is no place in my experience where placebo and expectation and emotions play a bigger role in men especially, but in people in general, when it comes to anything to do with sex drive, libido, that type of thing. I mean, that really is mostly up in our head. And placebo is a legit effect. People, again, they don't really understand what placebo is and how it works, and so they tend to, of course, double down on almost rejecting it. A lot of people, I don't know, some people are under the impression they are immune to placebo, and no human being, not a one, me included, are immune to placebo. Some people are obviously more prone to it than others, but I've seen some really, especially in this particular area, I've seen some really interesting effects of placebo or emotional phenomena. I'm not going to keep using. But when it comes to this area, and I'll give you one example of and I have a bunch of them because I've worked with, men in this area specifically on their libido and their emotional area when it comes to libido and sexual drive and, that type of thing. So Steve asked, if you have nighttime erections, wouldn't your testosterone probably be normal? Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good indicator, Steve. But honestly, I'm not a huge fan of that. Again, it's so weird. Like, again, men, as you know, we're so emotional about this. I've had also guys panic and say, well, I used to get, erections every, morning, quote unquote, morning wood every morning. And now I haven't had one, and they'll panic. I mean, like, so and to be honest with you, for myself, I don't get them at all. I haven't had, and I have my libido, my interest in sex has not changed since I was 16. And to be perfectly honest with you, for the most part, unless there's something I can do with it in the morning, that is somebody, is lying next to me and I can do something with it, I don't get night erections or any, unless I'm having a wet dream or something. So I don't personally think that's a really good indicator. I'm going to say on the flip side, hey, I mean, if you're waking up, in the middle of the night, every night or whatever, with erections, yeah, you're probably doing fine. But I just don't think that's a very good indicator. I've never found that very useful. So I'm going to give you like a story. Let me give you a quick story about a buddy of mine, and I have a bunch of these, but this was very, very indicated to me. Buddy of mine, a young man, he was, this was a long time. He was like 30 years old, worked out, lean. He was in great shape. He was in a relationship with this woman, and she was very abusive to him. And all of a sudden he couldn't get erections. He just could not get erections. And I kept telling him it's in your, I don't want to say in your head, because again, people don't like to hear that. I would say to him, it's emotional. Your brain is telling you this is not the person for you. You want it to work, but it's not going to work. And he didn't like to hear that. So he went to the doctor, and this was before Viagra, any of those PDE inhibitors. The doctor gave him a shot right in his penis, which doesn't hurt, by the way. I know it sounds awful, but there's actually no nerve endings right in the spot. And there's this drug they can give you. It's a prostaglandin that will give almost anybody an erection. I mean, no matter what, they use it all the time to test erectile dysfunction stuff. Doctor gave him the vial to take home and said, if he can't get an erection, go give himself a shot. So he couldn't get an erection with her. He gave himself a shot. Everything was great. And he never had to use it again. That was the one and only time he ever needed to use that again, because he now knew that if he couldn't get an erection, he had something to fix it, and he didn't have to stress about it, and it fixed it. It was done. Of course, he then realized that the problem was not his dick. It was his girlfriend. and he finally got the nerve to break up with her, and it was the end of it. Now, I've seen that happen with a bunch of men. And I don't want to be like anti like relationship or marriage or whatever, but I've seen this happen a number of times. So my point being is that men and our libido and our erections and all are very, very tied into our emotional phenomena. And you all know that. You know that instinctively, but I'm hoping So my point of this section is that testosterone boosters, testosterone in general, if you're not keeping track of it, you don't know where it's at, and you're just going to kind of like, think you're low in testosterone because of, whatever, low libido or depression or so on and so forth. And you're just going to go like try some testosterone booster. Don't do that. Go get your testosterone checked, see where you're at, and then make some decisions. Okay. So, so Marco, hey, Marco, said, if your libido is fine, you're not deficient, question mark. Probably true. Again, see, this is where the problem is, Marco, that I have known guys with normal to high testosterone that were having libido issues, which brings us back to what we were talking about, probably emotional phenomena, and so forth. And I have known guys with pretty low testosterone who were fine. Now this brings us down to another point, that we are not, our libido and our sex drive is not just a factor of our testosterone levels. We are complicated creatures. Now, obviously it's a factor among many, but I've known some guys who were really pretty borderline, when they were surprised when their test came back that it was as low as it was because they had high libido. However, they noticed in other areas, in the gym that they just weren't as strong and they weren't putting on muscle and they just felt weak and they wanted to check it out. And, my first advice to them, of course, was, well, first let's get some labs done. And this is going to get a little more complicated, but this will segue nicely into the next section that we need to talk about as far as testosterone levels and testosterone boosters. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Which is what we need to look at and talk about a little bit on testosterone boosters and testosterone levels, is what it's not my term, but it's called non-testosterone mediated effects, which is to say that the effects that the testosterone booster that you're using may not actually be due to testosterone levels per se. For example, let's say just, theoretically that the product you're using is not raising testosterone per se, but it is reducing bound testosterone and increasing free testosterone, SHBG. That is a protein bound form of testosterone. That's the major protein bound form. There's others, but that's the major one. So let's say, and I'm not really I'm not trying to sell testosterone boosters, but let's say they only looked at total testosterone and they didn't look at free testosterone. Well, free testosterone is technically considered the biologically active testosterone. Again, it's more complicated than that. We used to think, again, things used to look very black and white to us, that the SHBG bound testosterone didn't do anything and it was only the free. And as always, the human body is a whole lot more complicated than that. There's weakly bound testosterone and so forth. But end of the day, I think we generally consider the free unbound testosterone as the most biologically active. And so, or you could be taking something that, let's say, altered the estrogen or estradiol to total testosterone ratio. It lowers estrogen, which normally the reciprocal effect of that is normally that the body senses the lower estrogen and will pump out a little more total testosterone. That's the sort of that's the feedback mechanism kicking in, but just for argument's sake. And finally, getting away completely from testosterone at all, some things like, remember, I'm sure some of you were old enough to remember horny goat weed. That was like, and again, that was like a big one, I don't know, 20 years ago or so. And horny goat weed, again, enough studies came out where it doesn't seem to do a thing for testosterone. However, it actually may have a like a Viagra-like effect. It appears to be a mild, what we call PDE5 inhibitor. So phosphodiesterase is actually inhibition is actually how Viagra works. It's how Cialis works. So, and I did get some people I know, some guys I know said that, and you had to take a lot of it, but they said that if they took really high doses of horny goat weed, that they felt like, and I tended to trust these guys. They were pretty experimental and pretty objective types, and they said that they actually found that taking large amounts of horny goat weed, usually way more than the label said, they felt like they got something from it, from more of an erection type perspective. But the reason that horny goat weed became a product, the reason why it's called horny goat weeds, is that goats and other animals, sometimes it was known for, they would eat it, and they would, the farmers would notice that they were having sex more often, and so on and so forth, and it sort of became a herb or a weed that was sort of associated or synonymous with sexual products or sexual effects. And then it became like a thing, but it just sort of like de facto they assumed was working through testosterone, and it was not. So you really, again, have to think of non-testosterone mediated effects. So my advice here, before I get onto another topic, or another aspect of this topic, as to what my recommendations, and we'll talk about a couple of things. So Steve said Tribulus was supposed to help. Yeah, again, Steve, some people said, oh, you got to be the right Tribulus. It's got to be the right extract. It's got to be, it has to have the right amount of active ingredients, and so on and so forth. There were some studies out that were, again, kind of suggestive and somewhat promising, but I agree. I mean, I didn't notice anything back in the day, and this was, 30 years ago, and nobody I knew ever used it, ever noticed anything. So before I get to my offer, well, actually, let's just get to the offer, and then we'll get to my recommendations here. So this open offer, if you can see, I don't know if you guys can even does my pointer show up on your screen, or am I only seeing my pointer? Anybody tell me that? Can you see me actually putting that under an open offer? But anyway, I wrote this, and I've done this for a couple of companies, and I had this open offer to any company that wanted to approach me to conduct a small study for them. I would set it up. I will run it. I will test their testosterone. I mean, this would be a very simple study, not a terribly strong study, what we'd call open label, but I'll do it. I mean, I've been hard on these testosterone boosters, as long as I've seen them. And I've had this open offer, of which I would be more than happy to run the study for them, take the blood work, write it up, and I will write a glowing apology to them and anybody else if their product actually does something. And I don't even mean, it doesn't have to do anything, as I mentioned earlier, like increase their muscle mass. Just show a statistically significant increase in testosterone and free testosterone or whatever. We can look at, of course, estradiol. We can look at bound testosterone and so forth. And that's been an open offer I've had. I'm hoping you can see where it says open offer there. And I've had that, well, I don't know, a long time. And I've done that for a few other companies, and not one has taken me up on it. As I'd expected. I wouldn't either if I was them. I'd be just raking in the dough, pretending the stuff actually did something. Why actually step up and fund actual science, right? I know I'm being a little jaded, but 30 years in the business or so, I tend to be a bit jaded about this. So where does this leave us? Questions, comments before I move on? So Steve said, I don't see your pointer. Okay. But he said I did before. All right. Well, anyway, all I was trying to do is just point at where it says an open offer, Steve, on the article there. And again, it'll be linked below the video, and you guys can go read some more of I've also got some good links in here you might want to check out. But I have, like I said, I've had this open offer that I would take, a group of men, young men, applicable men, not overweight men with low testosterone, loaded to get an effect. I would take the applicable a group of men that are buying these things, honestly, which are, usually young guys that want to gain muscle mass in the gym, and we would test them. We'll feed them the product, and we'll try to, I'll control their diet the best I can and all that. And I'll do it basically for free. I mean, just for the cost of, they got to pay for the lab work, of course. But so there's my open offer. I've had that there for years. So what is my advice? So my advice is this. I would basically do the best you can to optimize your natural testosterone levels by, number one, keep your body fat in check. Every time I'm on a forum, I visit like Excel Mail. That's a really good, by the way, if you really want to go to a good online forum run by, some smart people talking about HRT. Mostly it's mostly an HRT, TRT forum, but there's other talks about nutrition. But Excel Mail, when I'm on there, when I'm on some forums or pages, and I see, somebody, some, guy complaining about testosterone and libido, and my first question is almost always, what's your BMI? And almost invariably their BMI is high, and nobody wants to hear it. But the number one thing you can probably do for yourself to keep your testosterone levels healthy for your age and all that and your genetics is keep your body fat in check. Two, of course, is to make sure that you are getting in all those essential nutrients that the body needs for optimal testosterone production. Magnesium is a big one. I mean, magnesium, 80% of the population is frankly deficient in magnesium. That's a lot of people. Zinc is the other obvious one. Fat. Studies have found that you need it seems to be about 30% fat in your diet to produce optimal testosterone levels. And some studies have found that you also at least need at least some saturated fat. Apparently the body needs some saturated fat to produce optimal testosterone levels. Above 30%, they've done graded studies. Above 30 doesn't seem to have any additional effects. So, obviously regular exercise, but not overtraining. Again, overtraining is a killer to testosterone. Dieting, of course, I mean, again, you can't help it if you're trying to lose fat or whatever, but, understand that your testosterone levels are going to go up and down when you diet, but controlling stress is a big one. There's a number of medications and stuff. I can't go through the entire list, but basically what I would do is I would not spend any money on dedicated testosterone boosters. I would focus on these big picture things that we know support healthy testosterone levels, and focus on that, and spend your money on other supplements. I mean, I have a whole list of supplements I take, and especially during these days of COVID, I've added a whole bunch more that are more immune supportive and that type of thing. And I just wouldn't waste your money on it. So, actually, I mean, I think I got past one thing I want to talk about. You guys probably remember, 10, well, even 20 years. I don't know. It's been a long time, but like D-aspartic acid was a thing. D-aspartic acid was kind of like the perfect, kind of the poster child for this topic in a sense, but the next one is even better. But it had some interesting studies that were not done in the US. They were done in, I think, Italy. There's a few countries where, these kind of really glowing studies tend to happen. And, these are places where oversight of the quality of studies are not as good. It's much easier for researchers and stuff to be part of the people that own the product or want to sell the product. It's much easier for them to be part of those studies. It happens in the US, of course, too, but sometimes they get caught and it's not as easy to do. But almost invariably, those products will come to the US and sell a lot. And somebody here in the US in a third-party lab that has no connection to the product will do a proper controlled study and find bupkis. D-aspartic acid was kind of a perfect example of that. A study was done, and at one dose, it had no effect on testosterone, and at a higher dose, it lowered testosterone. So there was a slight trend to increases in strength, what they call a trend. It didn't reach statistical significance, so technically nada, but there was a trend, and that was it. So finally, let's get the reason I decided to do this. Let me get rid of this. I think I can get rid of this article. And I think it's anything beyond this open offer here. Let me look down to see if I have anything more interesting. Open offer. No, nothing there. Okay, so I'm gonna check out of this article and just have my my ugly face here. All right. So the reason I this actually came on my radar to do this video, and remember this article I put out a long time ago, was somebody pinged me and said, Will, what do you know about this new testosterone booster that's getting a lot of traction or press? This Tongak Ali. And I was like, Tongak Ali, stuff's been around for 30 years. Long Jack, and some of you, again, probably remember that. at least 25 years ago or so, it was a big deal. It was getting a lot of, attention. There were some, again, very typical studies, what I was mentioning earlier. They were done in sort of these really obscure places, published in obscure journals. They sounded really promising. Sold a bunch of Tongak Ali, or it was then called, it was like Long Jack. And then it just like disappeared. I guess recently, I think it was Joe Rogan had somebody on there who was really pushing the Long Jack and making glowing statements about it and so forth. So I was getting pinged, by email stuff saying, Will, what do you think of this new testosterone booster? And there's nothing new about it. It is, as I said in the beginning of the show, it's a retread. It disappeared for enough time most people forgot. Now you have a whole new crop of men, and younger men probably mostly forgot about it. There is a fair amount of data or studies on it, though. I mean, if you go look at articles and you see like the references, they actually can look somewhat impressive. But if you take some time to go look at the studies, it's a mishmash. It's a big mishmash of little tiny studies, studies that are just abstracts or were put up as a small thing in some conference, gets a mention. Or the effect is not very impressive, or they are done. One I saw actually had a lot of men in it. The size of it was pretty impressive, but it was done on testosterone deficient men, and did have a bump in testosterone. I would say that as studies go, as testosterone boosters go, that one actually has probably more data behind it, suggestive data behind it than most, but that's not really honestly saying a lot, but it's saying more than, the ones that we know that literally have either none or very little. It's one of those, if you want to try it, it's your money, but I don't have a lot of faith in it. One of the effects, speaking of non-testosterone mediated, that I saw is it actually may be fairly effective in lowering estradiol. That was kind of an interesting possible effect. I still tend to think that, for one thing, and this is a whole other topic, and I just can't cover it in this video. Estradiol is a whole other topic. You do not want to automatically suppress estradiol. Men need estradiol. Any sort of discussion or estrogen where there's floats around where just estrogen is bad for men and you want to lower it is absolutely false. It's bad for you. It's bad for your libido. It's bad for your mood. And again, the best way to lower elevated estradiol is to lower body fat. If you're lean, it's very unusual that a young guy or a youngish guy is going to be lean and active and eating well and have elevated estradiol. Very rare. So almost invariably, elevated estradiol comes because the enzyme that converts testosterone to estradiol is found in fat. And so you have a lot of this enzyme floating around, and that's what screws up your testosterone levels and your estradiol levels. It becomes kind of a vicious cycle. You get fatter, you make more estradiol, and around you go. So that's an interesting possible effect of this Long Jack. But again, I am not a fan at all of just automatically lowering estrogen in your typical healthy guy who does not have high estrogen. And remember, the only way you're going to know is going to be blood work. Any subjective symptom type stuff is nonsense. All right. See if I have anything else to say on this. Jonas is asking if HGH is anti-aging, why none of these older bodybuilders that are in their 50s or 60s don't really look any younger than someone who didn't take HGH. I guess that's a good question. I'm not sure if that's totally true, though. I mean, some of these guys, I guess I can't name names because I can't prove it, but Remember, we've talked about ex-bodybuilders. Remember, they weren't taking just HGH. They were taking a whole lot of other things. And, they were taking a lot of stuff that is, they take a lot of drugs, some of which are rather toxic, and some of them are recreational and so forth. So that's not a very good example. HGH is anti-aging in the sense that, again, if you're an older person and you are low on it, you're deficient in HGH, and you take a little bit, just enough to get you back up to, again, the levels of a healthy younger person, there are some anti-aging benefits to it. And we can name some stars, movie stars. I think where we're going with this, who, these guys are like in their mid 70s and they look pretty darn good, remember, in aging, anti-aging and aging and longevity is not just a visual thing. We're talking, this is lab related stuff. Are these people biologically younger than they look, i.e. things like telomere lengths, and mitochondrial function. There's a lot to aging that is not, as you say, the way they look. But older bodybuilders, we're talking about bodybuilders specifically, Jonas. We're talking about very high HGH intakes, which is quite bad for you. It can cause diabetes. It can cause nerve damage. We're talking about high dose steroid intake. We're talking about all kinds of drugs. So I don't think they're a very good. Example. But I do think that, like any drug, and in pharmacology, there's the expression is the dose makes the poison. It's called the 3 Ds: drug, dose, duration. HGH, used correctly in the right person, in the right population, is a beneficial anti-aging drug. If not used in that manner, it is not. And if used in excess in the wrong population, it probably could have the opposite, just like testosterone, right? Back to my last and final recommendation, because I've been on for 40 minutes. I want to go back a little bit and just say, okay, you're doing all the right things. You don't, and your testosterone is still low and you're having symptoms and all that, then you might be just a candidate for TRT and HRT. I would do, what my advice would be to do all the right things and, keep your testosterone levels as elevated as you can during the healthy routes of the things that we discussed. And the day that, that it's just not, you're not able to do it due to age, due to, things you just can't control, then it's time to talk to somebody about, testosterone replacement and hormone replacement. And the only way to really know that, is blood work. I would recommend any man over 40 to get yearly blood work done and get his testosterone levels done. Again, most doctors don't do that. So don't for a second think, oh, that's, I had blood work done last year and I was good. That is not in your normal blood panel. You have to ask for it. And the only time the majority of doctors are going to do that is if you complain about symptoms. Then they might say, and by that time, why should you wait till you feel like shit and you can't get an erection, you're depressed to test? That's, to me, is ridiculous. I think that testosterone should be a normal test during your physical or whatever in men at least over 40. 40 is kind of the dividing line where men tend to have problems. However, we are seeing younger and younger men with lower and lower testosterone. So my other advice used to be, over 30. I've been getting blood work since I was in my 20s, and I think it was very, very useful. I know what my testosterone levels were in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, and my 50s. And I found that very helpful. But at very least, I think if you're over 30, I would say get your testosterone levels checked maybe every 3 to 5 years, as long as you're not having any symptoms. And I would say over 40, I would get them done yearly. But my point being, do all the right things you can do to control, and have healthy testosterone levels. Check your free testosterone, and your E2 and all that. And at some point, if that is not working for you, then you need to speak to somebody about TRT and HRT. And that would be it. And I wouldn't waste at this time, really. I wouldn't waste money on testosterone boosters. And until I see one that changes my mind, and again, my offer is open to any company out there that wants me involved to help them, shape some studies and get some blood work done, and put out a decent little open label study for them. I'm happy to do it. But I don't think my phone will be ringing off the hook with people. I got something. following up on that. So, obviously this broadcast was brought to you by, of course, Alpha Joe Coffee Booster. Tastes good, feels good, good for you. Doesn't get any better than that as far as I'm concerned, but I'm a little biased being the designer and all that. Steve said, if I took a peptide to raise GH because it makes your body produce it, would you burn out your gland and make GH in the long run? That's a good question, Steve. Actually, and you know what? I don't think burnout is probably the right term, but I think you're on the right. I think you're in the right direction. I have very little faith in those peptides myself. But the doctors I've talked to, I know some anti-aging doctors that have used them, and their experience was similar to what you're saying, is that they found that at first they worked pretty well, and then they had to use higher and higher doses, and to the point that it became so expensive that you might as well just use GH. That was the conclusion of the doctors that I know that I talked to. And so, again, maybe that's the type of thing that you rotate. But I don't personally have a lot of faith in those peptides, because, as you say, all they really are is as stimulators of your pituitary. And I don't know if there's any studies in terms of, if it quote unquote burnout of pituitary at some point, the pituitary just, stops working. I don't think that happens, but I don't think that's been looked at. But it does seem that at least clinically speaking, I was told that you need more and more of them to get the same effect. At least the effect on IGF-1 levels. And I've known a number of people that have used them that, really didn't get. Again, IGF levels went up a little bit. Nothing like they saw with GH. So that might be one of those kind of things you experiment with. But again, get blood work. At least get your IGF-1 levels checked, see what they are before, see what they are after. You can go some subjective stuff like, less pain in your connective tissue and stuff. But again, that's really not reliable. I would get blood work and see what your IGF-1 levels are doing. And testosterone, by the way, does increase IGF-1 levels a bit. Not as much as GH will, but it does bump up. Again, GH and testosterone, there's still an axis there where there's some feedback going on there. I think it's more indirect. But I have definitely seen GH does not tend to raise testosterone, but testosterone does seem to raise IGF-1 a bit. It's about 30% in my experience. So, all right. Hopefully that's it. Any questions, comments? We're on almost 50 minutes, and that is my summary of GH boosting supplements, with a short talk on what's quote unquote making the rounds again. Making the rounds again, the Tongak Ali Long Jack thing. If you look, some of the articles you'll read look pretty impressive, but you really have to go and look at the studies they're referencing, and there's quite a few of them, but again, a lot of them aren't really all that impressive. And again, in the real world, myostatin. Steve mentioned myostatin. Remember for 10 years ago, a bunch of myostatin inhibitors popped up. As like the one that was made of seaweed, and it was a big seller, and I believe there were some studies done and it didn't do shit. I don't know what is in the pipeline for myostatin inhibition, but again, I think we've already gone past. I mean, mTOR is the big one, and myostatin, but mTOR suppression and mTOR stimulation is the big one now. That seems to be sort of the master pathway of it all as far as anabolic, catabolic processes. And again, there's two different mTOR pathways that you have to look at. And from a bodybuilding perspective, I want to gain muscle. mTOR is a big deal, but mTOR also has to do with, again, anti-aging and cancer and that type of thing. And it may be good for younger guys trying to gain mass, and a really bad idea for older people that want to not overly encourage cancer growth. If you go on Brinksone and look under BCAAs, I wrote a discussion about leucine and BCAAs. Are they anabolic? And the answer doesn't look very promising. And are they something that people that are carcinogenic? That is not carcinogenic. It's not the right word. Carcinogenic is a specific test for carcinogenesis. But could high intakes of leucine and BCAA as mTOR regulators be a potential issue with cancer? Well, the answer may be yes. So look at that article. Just go look at BCAAs and cancers on Bringzone. So there's always a double-edged sword. I've said this before. I will close out with this. There is no free lunch in human biology. Zip, nada. Does not exist. And don't assume it ever exists. There's no free lunch. So for every time you tip a pathway, think you're outsmarting a pathway and so forth, there is a price to be paid. And that doesn't always negative. I mean, again, there's a risk to benefit with everything we do. And that's what you have to assess is risk to benefit. That's really it's really the crux of it. Again, another topic for another day. So, all right. I'll see you all later. I hope that covered the topic well. Anybody using Alpha Joe, let me know, because we could use some more feedback from people, and some videos would be great. And I'll see you guys all on the Brink Zone.